Hello and welcome to Big Deal. I'm Nisha Poddar. Now on the deal street, it may be a season of slowdown as capital becomes expensive and markets volatile. But there is an area of future businesses which continues to see interest coming in from focused funds. Now, we are talking about the global thrust towards climate consciousness and the investment scenario in that particular space. And it's intact so far with an added impetus through global efforts like the recent COP27 summit. Let's find out more from our panelists today. Joining me on the show are Anjali Bansal, the founding partner at Havana Capital Climate Fund, and also John Kretz, who's the CEO of RMI. Welcome to CNBC-TV18. John, starting with you. What has been the biggest highlight from the COP27 summit, which will lift the focus on energy transition across the globe?
Yeah, thanks so much. Delighted to be here, Nisha. I think the big stories at COP have to do a lot with finance, right? As we think about both how exactly the global south in particular is compensated around loss and damage relative to some of the severe impacts that they're seeing on overall climate devastation here, from floods and heat waves through to kind of overall crop failures and other issues. That's been front and center, but there's also been signs of forward motion and progress in unsticking some of the capital flows from north to south and from south to south, especially in Indonesia with their recent announcement at the G20 with a blended finance vehicle helping them make the transition faster. So these are some of the exciting things that are certainly happening right now on the investment front. Of course, there is ongoing discussion here about the future of oil and gas. Last year, there was a discussion around coal, and there was an agreement that unmitigated coal should be phased out. And now the discussion on oil and gas was poised to do the same, but as of this morning, kind of drew back from that. And it looks like there won't be an announcement on that front. There is, though, very much ongoing support for natural capital and thinking about how exactly we value better the Earth's resources. And there was almost a rock star reception yesterday for Lula as he came in, kind of bearing the banner and the flag to support the Amazon and the preservation of natural capital here going forward.
That's right. And John, also RMI, the organization that you represent, has been working very actively towards reducing the greenhouse gas emission across the world. Now, Anjali, before I start talking about the investment destinations and the thesis and the sharpened focus that Havana Capital has towards the climate consciousness and areas of interest there, my one question is, while the economy is looking difficult, we are talking of recessionary phase also going forward, and when it's a matter of survival for most of the companies, do you think that the climate consciousness, the investment towards energy transition and going towards more sustainable forms of energy is taking a back seat, or there could be a lower liquidity flow?
So, Nisha, first of all, it's great to be back with you on CNBC talking about climate and sustainability, and with John here as well. So I think climate and sustainability is now definitely the next big global imperative. It's where we were with digitization and technology 25 years ago. Digitization has got embedded across the board in how we live, how we work, how enterprises work. And the same thing has to happen with climate action and sustainability. So it's not just a planetary imperative, it's also a business imperative. So while, yes, we will go through our ups and downs on the economy, we will have global sort of geopolitical issues, the investment behind climate and sustainability, and particularly climate action, whether it is energy transition, energy security, food security, I think the focus on that is sharper than ever, both in the political discourse, policy discourse, as well as the economic discourse.
All right. So it really sustains, and people are working towards it. Many companies have given their road and path to to sustainability in the coming years as well. So that goes on. But John, looking at the global picture and where India stands, and you have spent a lot of time on India-focused, projects as well for energy transition. Where does India stand at this point, and how is it growing? Give us an insight into that.
Yeah, so in order for us to really make this transition and to create climate alignment, we're going to need to spend 3 to 5 trillion a year this year and every year for the next 30 years, right? And India is uniquely poised right now to actually profit from and lead the world globally in this transition. It has some of the best solar resources in the world. It is developing incredibly quickly at a moment where it doesn't need to retrofit existing capital, but actually can build right from the start. And in the process, actually pioneer some of our technologies around things like green hydrogen and how you use your amazing solar resources ultimately to produce green molecules that can then be used for everything from steel and cement to ammonia to support global industries like shipping and fertilizer. This is a tremendous opportunity for India overall, but it's not just around hydrogen, it's also around areas like mobility, where we've seen, working alongside Niti Aayog, the opportunity to rapidly electrify, kind of the overall mobility fleet within India, especially starting with urban delivery vehicles and TNCs or taxi and livery vehicles, right? And by starting early with two-wheelers and three-wheelers in urban environments, you not only get the benefits of climate reduction, but you also get the benefits of air pollution reduction and quieter cities. And all of this infrastructure, as it's built up, provides India the opportunity to not just clean the air in its cities, but also to build out battery supply chains and play into the overall industrial base. So it's a very exciting time for India to step forward and lead on many of these new green technologies that need to be taken to scale, not just to meet India's internal needs, but become a major then export market for India to participate in here going forward.
All right, export market as well. And I'll come to other legs of being the export market for the world when it comes to the clean and green technology. But Anjali, John was mentioning about the clean mobility aspect. You've been an investor and you have a keen eye on what is going to make money. How do you see the potential of electric vehicles while our infrastructure, battery and charging facilities are still only at a nascent stage?
So Nisha, this is how investors see things. Anything that is at a nascent stage is an opportunity, right? Somebody will build it out. And we are investing in the companies that are creating the technology, they're creating the stacks, as well as mobility. So I'm going to take a step back for a minute. And John mentioned this from his vantage point at COP. What I've been seeing and what we've been seeing globally, whether it is in the US and the discourses in the Middle East and here now in Singapore, India is integral to global climate solutions. We are a large economy, one of the fastest growing economies, large and young population, and we absolutely aspire to continue growing over the next 2 decades. Much of our infrastructure is yet to be built. Much of our mobility is yet to be built. So we do have the opportunity to do it right and follow a much greener development model, much like the Honorable Prime Minister and Niti Aayog also has put out, which is the Panchamrit model, and more recently the Panch Pran, which is around sustainable and inclusive development. Mobility, energy transition, energy access, carbon, and food security are integral parts of this. So at Avana, we look at all three, right? So we look at energy transition, mobility and supply chain, and food security as our investment pillars, specifically around mobility, as you mentioned. I think John was absolutely right. Agree with him that solving for intra-city movement of goods and services is a critical component, one of taking pollution away from urban centers, but also supporting and facilitating. And we have a national EV mission, which says a 50% fleet on streets to be EV. Charging infrastructure will get built. Some of it will be large-scale capex. Green hydrogen will happen. And I think we have some leading Indian companies who are investing both science dollars as well as commercial dollars and rupees into green hydrogen.
Yes.
And similarly, when we have a company called Turno is actually enabling at scale a large-scale adoption of electric vehicles by small commercial vehicle operators. So this is your 1 ton, 2 ton CV, which is the backbone of all intracity deliveries and intracity trade. Right. So once that goes, then similarly, I can keep going. We have a number of companies that we are seeing. We see 200 companies every quarter that are enabling transition.
So Anjali, you mentioned, let's focus on mobility bit because you have a fair bit of investments there. And you mentioned that at a nascent stage, we invest so that we see the potential to grow. But when we are talking about innovation and technology, there is also a risk of technological changes and evolution. How do you balance that out? Give us an insight from an investor.
So from a Avana point of view, we invest in market-ready, commercializable business models. So where a lot of the technology risk is already taken care of at the lab stage. But that said, going beyond Avana, what we need is across the ecosystem, and frankly, we are seeing this. We are seeing a lot of R&D capital going in, whether it is in battery technology or it is in food technology, including battery recycling. We know that we do have a particular dependence on lithium. There are geopolitical realities, there are supply chain interruptions as well. So it's not just technology risk, Nisha, but also in some ways supply chain risks that need to get mitigated. So there is lab stage R&D capital that needs to go in. There is, of course, folks like us who are early stage, who we come in and help companies commercialize the technologies and scale up. And then eventually it leads to much larger scale build out of infrastructure. And we have seen this in the solar space, for example, right?
Right.
Solar, we now have utility scale solar that is no longer a sort of venture stage, but really large capital going in. And it has been mentioned earlier, India in particular is a great market for solar energy. And we are starting to see the transition, at scale transition to 50% renewable across the country.
That's right, Anjali, well pointed out, because the government has also put a lot of thrust towards solar energy, and some of the big houses with deep pockets have been working towards reaching that aim by the government as well when it comes to the renewable sources of energy. But we'll slip into a short breather on the show at this point, and we'll come back and discuss much more about the investments and funding in the sectors of the future, which are clean and green technology. Stay tuned to Big T. Welcome back. You're watching Big Deal, and we are discussing the investments that are going into climate consciousness as well as energy transition businesses. Now, John, we were trying to understand that which are the areas which are getting funding and how the technological risk can be really mitigated. In your view, is enough innovation being funded, and where does India stand in all of this when it comes to exporting not just the transition materials as well as the products, but also innovations of the future?
Yes, Nisha, as Anjali well knows, the innovation is happening right now, and the funders are stepping in at scale. So it's a very exciting moment for everything from the hard to abate sectors, which have traditionally been things like iron and steel and cement, sustainable aviation fuel, kind of heavy duty transport. We see tremendous opportunities and investments that are happening. India alone, as we think about heavy duty transport, right, will grow its trucking space fourfold here over the next 30 years. And that, if it's done right, and if the right sets of technologies are invested in, right, could save the world about 4 gigatons overall of carbon emissions, which is a sizable amount, right? And investors are looking at these opportunities and seeing the ability to invest and nudge here. Now, in order to get there, we need to solve some critical problems, right? We need to solve some of the global supply chain issues that exist, especially around critical minerals, right? Those are being solved both through new capacity development in areas like lithium, but also through technological advances, through working around areas like cobalt and creating alternative substitutes and chemistries that allow us to completely obviate the need for those materials. So we are, kind of seeing a moment where there's an investment not just in the innovative technologies that are needed in order to move us and create cleaner transportation and more efficient buildings and cleaner industry, but also in kind of the different technologies and capabilities here that allow us in the end to do each of these things cheaper and better, right? And
yes.
We look at solar, right? And we're on an exponential growth curve right now. In just the area of solar, in 2021, right, we struggled to produce about 30 gigawatts of solar at reasonable costs. In 2021, we produced 180 gigawatts, or roughly six-fold as much solar at cost competitiveness in 95% of the world. And by 2031, we expect to produce 1,000 gigawatts or more of clean solar that is cost competitive everywhere in the world. These are massive shifts and massive growths and technological advances that are making clean energy a clear winner here going forward.
That's right. And as you enumerated, there's a tectonic shift in the renewable energy component that the world has seen in the recent past. But Anjali, help us understand, since R&D is going to be so important, innovation is just so important, and cost efficiency in that science of green and clean technology is going to be so critical. How are you seeing the landscape when it comes to early stage R&D investments in the country? Because in the pharma space, in the drug development space, the industry has always stated that there isn't enough funding at a very early stage because it's a long haul investment. So from the investor side, how are you seeing it and how's the picture developing in India?
So it's I would say that, if you think about, let me break it up actually into a few pieces. So when we think about climate action, a lot of the focus, particularly in the North-South dialogue, in the North stays in mitigation and carbon and GHG emissions. In the South, in our part of the world particularly, we have to focus as much on adaptation and resilience building. We have some of the most vulnerable populations in the world here as well. So I'm going to shift, Nisha, with your permission, the question not just around R&D money and R&D dollars, but overall mitigation, adaptation, and resilience building for climate action. Take food security. We are vulnerable to climate change in a very significant way. Both part of our economy, large part of our economy is agriculture. We are monsoon fed. We are dependent. And when you have heat waves and erratic monsoon, you end up with crop failures and thus interrupted supply chains on that front. John's already referred to sort of the lithium supply chain. We are seeing the emergence of new technologies and energy. Sodium is emerging, for example. And consequently, in India, I think our R&D has to go in not just for new battery technologies or energy technologies, but also food technology. We are seeing companies, Avana has invested in a company called Iki Foods. Iki is really doing for food production, really creating absolutely climate resilient food systems that can grow tomatoes in the desert of Rajasthan. At 45, 50 degrees ambient temperature, they're able to grow tomatoes at very affordable market rates at scale. So I think we have to think about technology in the Indian and the global South and in developing countries context. Of course, in the hard to abate sectors, we will consume more steel, more cement, more power, and hence need to look at that. But we will also need to, in some ways, safeguard and create the security around food and other supply chains as well.
That's right. And in fact, one of the big arguments in this particular debate is also that whether India should develop its own innovative technology for clean energy in various spaces which are indigenous and very congenial to the local market and maybe cost competitive as well for our own good. But through the summit of COP27, Anjali, are there any such changes which opens up good potential areas of investments for future? Are you spotting any of that now?
Absolutely. So COP26 actually put out a lot of commitments. COP27, we have seen progress, and I'm particularly enthusiastic and happy to see the dialogue now shift towards financing and a lot of focus on green finance, sustainable finance, green bonds. So we do need the full stack of capital. We need R&D capital. We need commercializing equity, debt, and eventually also scaling up support that companies need. In particular, as I have spoken about adaptation financing, as well as building resilience in vulnerable populations. So I think all of that is required. In India, I think we are sitting at a unique opportunity, much like we talk about the startup ecosystem. Here as well, we have great technology, a fantastic set of founders, and very, very high quality of talent going into solving for climate and sustainability. I mean, the quality of young founders we are seeing today who say, hey, we want to solve for the next generation of mobility or the next generation of energy transition, carbon capture, or food security, I'm particularly energized, pardon the pun. But India has leapfrogged. We have leapfrogged in telephony and mobility. We have leapfrogged in payments with UPI. I think we will see some leapfrogging technologies emerge here also in climate. And solutions that get crafted here, whether it is for food or energy or mobility, I think will be relevant to the world.
All right.
And that's what we at Avana invested.
Anjali is energized and your energy is quite infectious and the passion for this subject, Anjali. But my last question to John. John, give us a picture. Financing is just so critical. It is the lifeline for this development. Of course, India has got enough funding. We have big entrepreneurs. You have also actively, RMI has worked on also supporting countries which do not have the wherewithal. How do you see the overall perspective now going forward? And what could be the key challenges, either on policy front or the companies front or financing front, which needs to be addressed immediately?
Yeah, that's a great question here, Nisha. And I think if we look practically right now at funding flows, especially between the global north and the global south, they're frozen. They're frozen for a number of reasons, right? We have ineffective multilateral and bilateral banks that can't act as a risk mitigator. They're actually competing with private capital. We have private capital constraints that are put in place by things like the Basel Accords that prevent, true private capital from investing in the global south here at scale because of overall risk profile requirements. We need to unstick that capital and allow it to flow more freely, especially to countries in the world that can't afford to finance the transition themselves. This should be our great moment of democratization, of access to energy, of freedom from constraints, right? As every country has both the sun shining and the wind blowing and lots of abilities to grow, kind of internal workforces to support what should be, kind of a natural and local transition here overall. And so ensuring that no one is left behind here for want of capital absolutely has to be front and center. And I know Anjali and her team are thinking about that, and many others are out there, but we do need to, put a little bit of acupuncture into the system here and make sure that capital does flow freely where it needs to, because this should be a moment, again, of everyone benefiting, but also of everyone participating, whether it be financially or economically or from a jobs perspective.
Very great points mentioned there, John. In fact, there has to be a democratic approach when it comes to access or funding for climate consciousness for every country, because this is not something which is just stuck to borders of each country. Any climate, mishap in one part of the world could really affect the entire global environment as well. So that's one consciousness that needs to be understood across the globe, and global efforts are being made. Thank you so much, Anjali, as well as John, for this riveting conversation of energy of the future and the investments that some of the companies and focus funds are making in this direction. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Big Deal. Thanks so much for tuning in.